Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are today. I hope every one of you is doing very well and safe in this turbulent times. And it's a very good time for us to discuss risk register, which is all about managing risks. And in today's webinar, we will be focusing on how to leverage risk register to manage risk. So as we are moving into how to leverage a risk register to manage risk, let's discuss about some of the important things. And those of you that already know me, I am Sriram Rajagopalan. For those of you that are first timers to this particular webinar, I'm working as an enterprise Agile evangelist. I have a doctoral degree in organizational leadership, MBA in management, master's in computer engineering, and a bachelorate in electronics and communication engineering. I started my career as a software engineer, progressed along as a team leader, business analyst, project manager, scrum master, agile coach, and I have served in the capacity of director and vice president managing program management office. I also have a number of different certifications that include portfolio management, program management, project management, risk management, agile, scrum, and Six Sigma black belt. And I'm also an instructional designer, speaker, writer, and author. I have facilitation experience in a number of institutions across US, India, UK, Canada, Switzerland, Brazil, and Vietnam. So I recently published a book about project management principles and how that forms the core organized common sense. It's available in the bookstore as well as in a number of online retail bookstores as well. It talks about how project management is a life skill, and it's also targeted for people that are not necessarily project managers. So risk management is an extremely important and pivotal area of project management that transcends much beyond project management per se. So let's talk about some of those foundational elements of risk at this point. Today's webinar is part of the three-part series on the 5th installment, Journey into Agile with Inflectra. Each webinar is approximately an hour long, and we will reserve time at the end for questions. So please use the chat window as I look into the chat window at that particular point in Q&A time. The webinars sometimes may introduce a concept using a tool, and in this particular webinar, I'm not planning to focus on any specific tool per se. So the three-part webinar for this 5th installment initially discussed about RACI, the responsible, accountable, consulted, informed grid to manage the stakeholders. And today we are focusing about leveraging risk register. And next we will be discussing why use of benefits registers in programs and portfolios. That will be in June. So when we talk about risk, it often reminds me of this big migration of animals in the Serengeti forest. There is this greener pasture that they have to go for, their survival, for food, and many other reasons, because food is actually drying up in the other end of the river. And as they try to cross the river, there is a lot of crocodiles over there, and they have to get through this whole process. So as part of that, they are naturally doing what is called, the process begin identification of the type of risk that they are facing, analyzing the actual risk effects, engaging how to manage with, as a herd to move over, and then manage their whole process as they are moving forward. So it's all about continuously balancing the benefits. Can they be on one end of the spectrum and still survive? Maybe, maybe not. Should they actually continue to take this particular risk? Maybe, maybe not. But as part of this whole process, they are constantly in the process of evaluating the cost benefits analysis. In this particular case, whether survival is going to be depending upon whether we are staying here or moving across the river, right? So why projects fail? If you take that analogy and start looking at this, why projects fail? When you look at the actual patterns that Pulse of Profession PMI published in 2017, approximately, they categorize two different groups of people according to their findings. One was champions and the other group was underperformers. And basically, when you look at this, 88% of the projects were completed on time, all the way to prioritize the development and skills of executive sponsors. What happened to risks? Throughout this entire section that I'm showing right now here, the word risk does not even come into play. In one of my projects that I was managing, one of the person that was working under me at that particular point in time said, thank you for introducing the concept of risk. But this person has been managing projects for quite some time, but never actually related to risks in the highlight of what risks actually mean, right? When you look at this, even though risks are not specifically mentioned as a word here, schedule and cost risk, scope and change risks are coming right over here. So 85% of the projects not completed on time. That's because of risk associated with the schedule. Projects are not completed within the budget. That's because risks are not managed according to the cost and budgetary considerations. Scope risk relating to scope creep, gold plating, and all those things. Change management, not necessarily managing different types of initiatives according to the change that is coming up. All those things are nothing more than risks. Those risks have an impact on any one of the project management components, which includes scopes, cost, change, quality, and all those things. Similarly, you have other things. When you look at the stakeholder and resource risk, develop the skill set of the executive sponsors, prioritize the development of technical skills, improve the leadership skill set, and all those things are all relating to the way you manage and engage the stakeholders and the way you identify the business value proposition and address the strategic component associated with those risks. So all these things are nothing more than different types of risks that manifest in this way, right? So risk management is a disciplined approach to risk negotiation. So identify, categorize, and actually negotiate for the right positioning. So that's what a good project management focusing on risk is focusing on, right? So let's take it a little bit more further here, okay? So when you look at this, risk is very subjective. The person that is stuck on the island, seeing as a boat says, oh, land, I'm able to actually see a land, finally I can go and rest on this island. But when you look at it from the other person's view, this person sees the boat and says, finally I have somebody who can rescue me. So it's all about perception. You need to look risk from the person who is the actual consumer of the effects of risk rather than from the way you think about risk. Right? So it's all about perception. Whenever you are talking about perception, the different people see them as a threat or opportunity. So it's whatever you view as the challenge will be an opportunity for somebody else. And that's where the competition starts coming up, right? So risk management approach focuses on a number of different things. If you focus on the details, it's going to be what are some of those information systems or the management of information system, everything that happens together to actually control the risks. And then there's going to be processes related to business that is going to come in. And then there's going to be the organization that does the prioritization and optimization and helping to select the right kind of initiative to work on those things. All those things are coming into play when it comes to the risk management approach. So on the one end, you have to think risk from both in positive and negative impact. Risk is not a bad word. It's not something to be avoided. In fact, it should be much more looked after and addressed. Right. So the risk management should not be just delineated to somebody way down and help desk and all those things. Instead, it should be viewed across the entire business spectrum. So organization, business process, and information system. It should be spanning across the entire spectrum. Now, when you look at this whole entire spectrum, they are not necessarily the same type of people. Some may be actually discussing stuff within the teams. Some may be discussing across the teams, but within the organization. Some may be actually evaluating future opportunities outside the organization. And that could be all over the place, right? So that means communication, governance, and reporting are all supposed to be across the entire spectrum. Different people require different expectations of communication, decision making, and reportings, right? As a result, we need to be able to address any uncertain event that may impact the project either positively or negatively. That has to be the focus in this communication, governance, and reporting. But what happens, right? How do we make it happen? When we do this, the steering committee has to be reviewing beyond the triple constraints. People don't look at the scope, schedule, and cost alone. Instead, they are also looking much beyond that to say what kind of people-related risks, infrastructure-related risk, facilities-related risk, and many other types of risk has to be actually reviewed upon, right? And that should be the main focus of the steering committee. And what does the steering committee do with this? They help go into the governance for appropriate decision making. If the governance cannot facilitate that decision making or enable people to do that decision making, the steering committee doesn't serve the purpose, and the steering committee cannot serve its business purposes if the communication fails, and if we are not actually focusing only on both the positive and negative aspects. So risk management approach has to be wrapped around this entire spectrum, right? So what is the framework we can start thinking in terms of implementing risk management at this point? There is an organization called National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and they have released a framework called Risk Management Framework for Information Systems and Organization. Although the focus is information systems and organization, it's a good system that encompasses all different aspects of it. When you look at their guidance, there are a number of things that come up, and the risk management framework should serve as a link and communication between risk management and the executive governance, right, which we talked about before. The same way, they should institutionalize the risk management across all the levels to prepare for an effective and efficient execution. So it's not just about the strategy, it's also about being strategic about execution. So how do we get people across? And again, they also have to focus on the cybersecurity with respect to the risk management framework. And how do we actually incorporate privacy related protection within our risk management framework as a result, and incorporate this whole process across the entire life cycle of the software development, right, of software or system development, the entire life cycle around that, right from the day we are thinking of an idea throughout the product life cycle, and it's actually ending in the past the growth stage. And you have to start thinking in terms of the supply chain related work along with that. Who is coming and providing the different artifacts, who is actually reviewing it, who is actually providing the coding, who is actually performing the the entire supply chain associated with this product from being an idea to the in the hands of the consumer, right? So the risk management framework has to encompass all these things, and as a result, they are actually providing a structure as well. And in their structure is like this. First you need to prepare for risk management, and as part of your risk management preparation, you are looking at how to categorize stuff, and then you are moving into how do you select the appropriate methodology, and prioritize the work and things like that, and then implement the solution, assess how it is working, and authorize appropriate changes that needs to be done, and constantly monitor how it is performing so that you are able to relive this cycle as you are continuing to move forward. That's the approach that risk management framework is from NIST. When you look at the Project Management Institute framework, they have a different structure, but let's look at this. Initially, they start with the planning. You need to have a plan for the risk management, otherwise you're not going to be able to do it well. So you plan for it, and then you identify appropriate releases, and then you do qualitative followed by a quantitative analysis. Then you implement the solution. then you see how your response is working, and then try to monitor it in the production environments, throughout the life cycle, and make some changes. So when you look at this, there is a good amount of parallels. The choice of words may be different, but underneath there is a good framework behind what you do. Right. So the goal here is both of them are fundamentally saying if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is the same case even in an iterative or agile or adaptive approaches too. You still have to have proper risk factored into your backlog. That's why it's called risk adjusted product backlog to begin with. Right. And that's what we do in progressive planning as part of our project delivery frameworks in other areas as well. So let's take a look at the stages of risk management. In this particular case, I'm going to pick up the PMI framework and then move forward at this point because there is still a lot of similarity. So when you look at that, the planned risk management comes up first, and you need to have a game plan as to how you are going to do that. And then you identify risk and perform this qualitative and quantitative analysis and do the risk responses and implement risks and monitor the risk, which we just talked about at a very high level. Now, each and every one of them produce a certain type of artifact that is really important for you to manage risk in your organization or for your project or program or portfolio, right? So the planned risk management creates what is called a risk management plan. And the risk management plan is what are the types of risks that we will do, how we will identify them, what's your governing process, and all those things. So when you are looking at how you are going to monitor, how you are going to address changes, and all those things are really coming from how you are going to manage risk within your project. And this could be coming from the support of your PMO or from a project office and different reasons. But then you are moving into the actual identify risks where you are creating what is called the risk register, right? A number of projects that I have worked on, I go and ask them like, okay, tell me the risk register, where is it? And there is no such artifact in the first place to begin with. In electronic form or in a non-electronic form, there is absolutely none to begin with. Well, then how do you manage risks, right? Now, if you don't identify risks correctly and document them, then you will never be able to understand how to analyze them, right? Now, what's the purpose behind analysis? That analysis is to primarily categorize them into, two big buckets. I'll get into those two buckets into three different things later. But, primarily, importantly, is this something that really something that we have to work on or something that we should put on the back burner or later, right? The whole idea is that we are focusing on what is called an individual contingency reserve. Should this risk materialize, how much is going to be required in terms of effort or money to be able to actually move forward and address this risk? That's the contingency reserve for now we can think of. And sometimes we may want to actually look at it from a larger aspect and not necessarily from individual risks alone. And other risks may have a domino effect and things like that. So quantitative analysis gets into a lot more additional detail. And at this point, the risk register is constantly getting updated. Here, you are not only looking at the individual risk, but also the overall impact to the project in terms of the contingency reserve. As a result of these things, you have a means by which you are able to say, this is more important, this needs to be addressed, and so let's have a plan to address this. And that plan is going to be the risk response plan, right? And then you are actually moving forward with the implement risk responses if those risks materialize. That's why I call them in red at the top, right? If that happens, you are invoking the appropriate change control using the perform integrated change control mechanism. And then you are trying to see whether your changes really help to solve the problem and things like that, right? That's the whole process begins the stages of risk response management. Now, the risk management may be a policy or a procedure document that the company gives you. So this is how we will manage the work or change management, risk management, things like that. But in order for you to move forward with the risk register, that's something that we have to do. It's not going to be the company identifying the risk register and the details behind it, because it's not a policy or a procedure document. It's something specific to the project, right? If we don't have that, then we don't have the risk response plan. Then we are actually not being proactive, right? So let's take this further. This particular section that I am highlighting in orange, that's the one that really needs the risk register, and that's the lion's share of risk management. If we don't do this, we don't have risk management protocol at all properly executed for our project. And so that's what the focus of our webinar today, as to how we can address this. So risk register becomes the important focal point as to how you are moving forward. So what does it do? In the identification stage, it helps you identify appropriate stakeholders. Remember, I mentioned before, it's all about being subjective interpretation. So I always tell, that's what I tell in my book as well, tell me the stakeholders identified in the project, and I will tell you if the project will be successful. This is more like, tell me your friends, I'll tell you who you are. Similar analogy. Tell me the stakeholders identified for the project, and I will tell you whether this particular project will be successful or not. Right? It's being subjective and being able to understand that. Right. The next one is going to be qualitative and quantitative analysis. In this particular stage, depending upon whether you are using quantitative and qualitative together, or qualitative alone, and all those things, there are lots of things. But at the end of the day, this helps to go into the 6P principle. I call this a 6P principle because there are 6 Ps. Proper proactive preparation prevents poor performance. Right, that's the 6P principle, right? Being proactive and planning for the things to go wrong, and then having a proper mechanism as to which one is more important, so that you are spending your time appropriately. And that's the goal behind the 6P principle over there. And the third one is going to be, when something happens, how do you implement the solution? How do you respond to the solution? And how do you monitor the effectiveness and efficiency with which your solution is actually working, right? And that's about delicately delegating, right? At the end of the day, project manager is not a single person that has to manage everything. Delicately delegating and building continuous accountability in each other. So when things go wrong, delegate responsibility to appropriate members, keep the checks and balances, so that when they are required to support the solution as the risk materializes, they are not caught off guard. Right, that's the whole idea of building that shared ownership and accountability, right? So that's the whole purpose behind the risk register. So you are going and evaluating, am I using the risk register for the purpose for which it is intended, right? So in the identification stage, you are building confidence. Building confidence for what and about what? So you are engaging experts. Remember, in the RACI diagram, we talked about, bringing the C consultant members, the consulting members, going and talking to all the different people that are supposed to provide solution support or implement different viewpoints and things like that. Bringing that viewpoint to say, how do I provide this correctly? What could go wrong? What are the things that we are not thinking through? So building the devil's advocate thinking right through that. And be proactive in identifying appropriate solution rather than let them fade, right? And then become realistic. Sometimes you need to actually evaluate, okay, I'm going to live with this solution if this happens. No, I cannot live with this solution because the magnitude of impact is going to be too high. So preparing appropriate individuals much in advance of what is expected to come, and moving forward. That way, nobody is having this shocking moments, right? That's building confidence, and that you are providing it by consulting experience. Now, you need to find out how you define risk for your project or program or portfolio or enterprise or whatever it is that you are working on. You need to define that. Now, this is not about we're going to keep fighting forever until we get a solution in place and things like that. It's much beyond that to say at the end of the day how much cost is going on, how much effort is going on, it's the opportunity cost of we actually coming up with a solution. Is this something we should live with? You have to think a lot more than that. What that means is a continuous focus on assessment of the risk and then plan for the risk appropriately. Right? So this is when the probability of occurrence and the severity of impact comes into play, right? So the probability of occurrence is going to let you know that this is going to happen, 30% of the time, 50% of the time, whatever be it, because at the end of the day, probability is all about likelihood and chance, right? But when it happens, what's the impact? It could be a natural disaster. The likelihood of that happening is probably, very slim. But if it happens, the magnitude of impact is going to be enormous, right? And so that's going to be the understanding. Okay, for this particular project that I am working on, what are the different types of risks that can happen, and then what is going to be the probability and severity assessment. That leads you into think, what can we proactively plan? Maybe the company has a lot of business continuity and disaster recovery plan that we can actually properly leverage if only we actually leverage those things correctly on time and understand them on time. The next one is going to be for our particular project, how do we reactively respond? If we are consuming certain things and we are moving forward, what if these things go wrong and we have to actually appropriately plan for it? That's the reactive response planning. But not everything should be, let's figure it out now, and then if we cannot do it, let's put it into our next phase or next iteration and things like that. That should not be the approach. There needs to be proper planning done as well. Remember, planning is essential, although plans may not be, right? So a lot of times I keep mentioning this what if, right? Well, based upon your probability assessment and all those things, many people may say like, oh, this is not going to happen and all those things. But the question you should be thinking is what if scenario. What if this happens, right? When that happens, the what if in the assumptions is going to be the alternative analysis. And frequently, some of those early project managers that I have talked to, I go and ask them, how many assumptions do you have? They will say 5 assumptions I have in my project. And I will ask them, how many risks do you have? And they'll say, we have no risks. Well, assumptions are expected to be true, right? But if they are not expected to be true, then every assumption is loaded with evil risks, right? So you have to understand that these are the root cause of evil. So how can you have 5 assumptions but no risks, right? So you have to think through that process. If you don't manage risk, I mentioned this in my book as well, if you do not manage risk, don't worry, risk will manage you. But the second option will not be pretty, right? Because then you have to reactively respond. Things would have been taking more time. You would have to be tapping into contingency reserves, probably even management reserves at that particular point. And so this will not be a good thing for you to have in as a dialogue with your sponsor and other stakeholders and team members, right? So we need to make sure that we have a plan in place to address these things. And at the end of the day, understand the risks from people that consume the impact of the risks, right? What risks mean to them, not from you. What risks mean to them. And the most important thing that you have in your backpack is going to be your RACI diagram, your RACI thing, which we talked about before, what is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, and how they align up with the operational strategy and operational excellence. If this is not truly understood, we are not going to truly understand stakeholders correctly, right? And how do you identify the risks? Now, think about those RACI, think about the different stakeholders. Now, with that aspect, come to identification of risk. Different documents that currently have, do a forward and reverse pass. Does the actual starting of the project, the charter, the scope, the risk, and all those things, do they line up from the conclusion that we have? In other words, what I'm asking, is this the minimal viable product? In order for us to have this minimal viable product, is all the above thing that we are identifying really relevant? That gives you a gap analysis thinking, right? Then start looking at the checklist analysis. What kind of checklist does the company have? What kind of, how often that have been filled in the production environment, in the testing environment, and all those things to come back with the requirements as to how we are going to move forward. This is one of the reasons why I always ask the definition of ready and the definition of done. All those things should have been drawn upon based upon things that have already happened within this particular company, not from a template that somebody gave or you downloaded from Google, right? Then the assumptions analysis. Never take them for granted that they will be actually, good. You have to start thinking in terms of every assumption and then convert them into risk. Good, effective project managers do not consider that assumptions are going to be standing as is. They convert every assumptions into a risk. Start investing some time into some of those diagramming techniques. There is a UML methodology where you can start putting together some ideas, simple flow charts, in a number of different bar charts, and all those things exist. So basically, in the root cause analysis diagram, start using these techniques to evaluate how you can have pictures tell a story and how you can have pictures reveal the gaps. And then have information gathering techniques. I always tell the 6 best friends that you will have, 5 W and 1 H, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So start thinking these kind of questions much in advance with respect to different people and bring those ideas together. Why is this important? Show me an example of this. Tell me why this is having a huge impact. Justify with an example. So those kind of things, if you are able to use those 5 why thinking and all those things, you are gathering more that is actually left unsaid. And those things that are left unsaid could actually come back and haunt you with respect to scope, schedule, cost, many other types of risks that you may miss out, right? So address the stakeholder perception at this point. So as you are looking into identifying each and every one of those things, something is going to be obviously there's a problem, or something could be interpreted to be subjectively a problem, right? So this is when, again, stakeholder perception is very important. So understand what is the risk appetite. The appetite is going to be the degree of uncertainty that one is willing to accept. For all that benefits that we are getting out of this project, what's the actual amount of uncertainty I'm willing to work with, right? It's not possible to quantify this all the time. It's not very easily possible to quantify this. Sometimes the organizations will tap into some of those risk management policies. If the risk exceeds a certain amount, then the person above can actually authorize this and come up with ideas and things like that. Persons beneath them will not have so much authority and all those things. So there is lots of different things that are coming into play here. And so the appetite has to be totally understood from who is the person and to what extent they are part of your governance decision-making process, right? To understand that. It's very difficult, but it's not impossible task. Right. The next one is going to be the tolerance. Here, the amount or volume that somebody within that organizational entity can withstand. So the sponsor may say, I'm willing to work with $100,000 loss, but whereas a QA manager may come back and say, I will not live with any more than 2 errors, 2 bugs. Because I want 0 quality, I cannot have any more than 2 non-issue kind of a bug. So they may take a complete different approach, right? So collectively, you are now breaking this organization into smaller business units that are actually delivering, and within those individual business stakeholders and different types of team members and all those things, you are trying to find out what is the actual tolerance that they have, right? So how much is too much for them, and what is not good enough for them? So things like that, you have to get into those kind of thought process. That drives you into what is called a threshold, right? The minimum and the maximum that people will be able to live with, right? So I can come back and say for every release, every potential iteration, I can live with 2 major, non-issues, low bug kind of an issue that I have qualified, I can live with them. But every iteration, if that's constantly, if the same type of problems are coming up, deployment file actually missing a file, or a spelling error constantly coming up on the website design, whatever be that, so if the similar patterns are repeatedly evolving, their exposure is actually getting more and more and more, and so the threshold comes into play at this point. Like, even though I can live with 2 of the errors in every iteration, I will not be able to live with the same patterns repeatedly coming up because we are failing to learn, right? So how is the exposure coming into the probability and impact? So whenever we are talking about probability impact, we are already coming down to threshold level. But do we know what those stakeholders are? Do we know who those decision makers are and what their maximum capacity is? And what is the organizational appetite in terms of that particular project initiative? If we don't understand these things, capturing just the probability and impact alone without any of the stakeholder tolerance and appetite, it only introduces conflict. Then people say, like, we should have talked about this. I didn't know this, I didn't know the impact. And so we are talking more and more, and it introduces, sour feelings. Relationships are getting sour at that point. So we need to truly understand that as we move forward here at all, right? So this helps you to move forward with what is called the categorization of risk. So when you start saying, like, I want to identify risk, you want to first of all categorize or identify broad categories of risks for this particular project. PMO may give certain support, but then you have to take this and make it your own. So some of the support that PMO may give is an example of this. So for a cost, if I'm picking up some examples here. So let's say for the cost, the low impact will be, I have sufficient reserve capacity available, and no big deal. Whereas on the medium side, cost estimates are not properly quantified. It was just an order of magnitude estimate, and there was really no detailed estimate done. And so we are moving forward with actual execution without doing some detailed estimation, right? On the high end, we are working with the external contractor or the consultant, and as a result of that, procurement always means high risk because cost is involved, and so high cost is going to be that. So this is what a rubric is. This high-level risk breakdown structure that's called RBS. I have categorized, for most of the projects that I do within my PMO, within my organization, this is what is the template or guideline that we have put together. And now for my specific project that I am working on, what is the cost? How much can I live with the time impact? What is my considerations for quality? What are the considerations for stakeholder controls I need to have? So different kind of things you have to think. And maybe this is not the complete list, and maybe you may have a different set of lists for your project, because it's a new product development, and certain things that apply beyond these things may apply, like infrastructure, for instance, may apply, and I have not captured over here. So this is what you are trying to think through in terms of what are some of the major category of risks that I really even have to start thinking through, right? That leads you into the analysis phase. The helpful process that leads you in the analysis phases is going to be, how do I prioritize? So in order for you to do that, you need to know, what did we learn? This is not the first time we are doing a project. What have we learned? If this is the first time we are doing a project, what are the things that we should learn as a company from other companies who have done similar projects? And what to address? What specific categories that we should really quantify further? And what to defer? How do I position things back? That's what prioritization is all about, right? So how do I constantly look into this process? So the quality evaluation gives you a guidance over here. First, it categorizes the risk, which we talked about, the risk breakdown structure. From there, you are creating what is called 3 types of list: prompt list, watch list, and pure list, right? I'll get into the details. Prompt list is, what are some of the things that previous companies have done that we really should use as a guidance moving forward? Or what are some of the checklists that we already have from previous projects that we have done that we should try to actually include here, so that we don't repeat the same failures, right? Things of that nature. And the watch list is going to be, it's going to happen, but not necessarily sure. But if it happens, the impact is so much. And so I'm going to put it on the back burner for constant monitoring. And the other one is going to be pure risk, where it's a very slim possibility of happening. But if it happens, it's not just going to be your project that will be impacted. All the projects within the organization may be impacted, or all the projects within the program or client portfolio may be impacted, and things of that nature, right? So let's start looking at how this gets built. The whole idea of your categorization of risk for your specific project is to create what is called the lookup table. And this is often called the risk score table. And you are basically using your own knowledge with different experts that will be working within your project, or somewhere analogous to your project, to use that knowledge to build what is called this risk exposure matrix. That helps you to guide these three different types of lists that I just told you. And you need to be very careful over here, because this prompt list is the pre-existing list, right? Things that may happen, higher likelihood or higher chances of something happening. And so you want to make sure that you want to avoid all these things. The watch list, don't major in the minor. You want to make sure that you want to address this, but at the same time, not on a daily basis, right? Third thing, spend time wisely. You want to have a game plan for this, but you are not the one who's going to manage this particular initiative on your own, right? So this helps you to actually move forward to the next step. And when you do this, there are multiple frameworks available for this. And depending upon the size, complexity, and nature of your project within your organization, any one of this format or multiple formats may apply. At the very initial stages, the SWOT and VUCA will be applicable. The strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat, and the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. Those are the frameworks that help you identify how do I build the appropriate category of risks, and how do I analyze them. What kind of patterns do I have from the industry, or from different organization within that industry, and things of that nature. But as you are moving into the specific nature of your own project, you can get into the TCOP and PEST lead, which is going to be the technical, environmental, commercial, organizational, operational, and political environment. That's TCOP. And then the next one is going to be the PEST lead, which is going to be the political, environmental, societal, technical, legal, ethical, environmental, and demographic. Those things truly come into play at this point. The whole output of all these things is to help you with the prioritization. Which one of those things are things that I really have to focus on? So now you have included the stakeholders, you have included the risk categorization, you have incorporated the policies, procedures, and guidelines, and you also learned previous project learnings, and you have incorporated those things to say, well, in order for me to produce this outcome, these are all the things that I'm going to focus on, because the potential opportunities for risk to impact these modules exist here when you are prioritizing that, right? And then as you prioritize and do these things, you are trying to learn from these elements, and you are trying to constantly optimize. That's the whole idea behind qualitative evaluation, how you do this. Now, all these things should lead you to what is called a good risk register, which is an example is like this. Right. So obviously the risk register will have something called a risk number. And if you use an application lifecycle management system like Spira or things like that, it will be automatically available for you. With the date, this is one is identified. You want to make sure that that's getting captured. The risk category, remember I talked about the risk breakdown structure. You are bringing those risk category. People have actually started categorizing at multiple levels, like first level and then the second level risk category and all those things. I haven't identified that. And then the actual risk, what is going to happen here, and then the threshold. What is an acceptable threshold? Remember, it is actually moving forward into those three things, the appetite, tolerance, and the threshold. So I have already come down to that particular level, which means I would have walked my path through, right? And then the probability from the risk breakdown structure. So you probably have the low, high, medium categorization over there. Right from there, you are using some color coding over here, or you can use the low, high, medium here. Here, red means high, yellow means medium, and then green means yellow. So you have done that. And then comes the actual impact assessment. Well, how much it's going to cost in terms of money and all those things, again, goes back to your own risk breakdown structure for that. And from there, you are driving into the similar logic behind the impact. And then the priority. So a lot of time people use the product of these things. If you are using a numerical scale, you can actually compute the risk score by multiplying probability and impact, and you will have a score, and then you can rank it according to in the descending order and come up with a priority. Sometimes you may also can come up with priority in a different way. Like, if the impact is too high, then I'm going to say the priority is high, that somebody above me has to review this. Or, if one of them is green, if the probability is too green, then I'm not going to too much worry about this. All these things are risk management protocols that you want to have. Remember that risk management protocol in the planning phase that I identified. So using these things, you can drive the priority. So I am driving the priority here, and then it is open or not. Right, I have opened it at this particular point, and somebody still needs to review and provide a solution. At this point, it is still open, so I can take a look at this and say, what are those high priority open risks projects that I have? And then you have to assign it to an appropriate owner. A lot of times project managers get into the habit of, all projects are mine and I'm going to do this. Don't do that. Instead, have a plan to address that. And then the progress update, what is the update that is getting tracked? And Spira plan introduces a risk module, which nicely captures a lot of these things. And this is an example of how a good quality risk register is. And using this, how can you manage? Right? Experience speaks. So at a minimum, this particular thing is looking at three important things, and I call it my own principle. Tap your own toe. I call this. So technical, operational, and environmental feasibility. Using all those things, you are saying like, okay, can we do this? Are we having any challenges in getting this thing done? Can we sustain it if we actually push it into production? Can we sustain this operational feasibility? And then environmental feasibility, the audit, the compliance, the regulatory nature of it, can we afford it, if you are pushing something that has a challenge? The cost of non-conformance related issues will come up, right? So update the quantitative risk with these things, right? Build better overall project risk. So how do I build contingency reserve that actually needs to be reviewed much beyond than the individual risks? Enhance it for better business decisions, because now you are using some data-driven approaches to make sound decisions with the help of governance. Then increase confidence in the estimates. Instead of actually telling like, okay, we will be able to do this, you are basically able to look at these risks and say, there is a dependency here, there is somebody else who needs to do this. As a result, we should not commit, we should not commit, and what's the extent we can commit, decompose them, and then run prototypes and all those things. So there is a lot more sound decision making happening over here. So quantitative techniques come into play with continuous probability. You are no longer interested in that low, high, medium alone. You want to get into a lot more. So when you go there, there are some simple techniques and there are some complex techniques. The simple techniques is going to be some of those triangular, the 3-point estimation or PERT estimates that you can do. The other one is going to be the expected monetary value. We can do that one as well. The next one is going to be somewhat involved, where you do some decision tree analysis, some FMEA, the failure mode effect analysis, and all those things will come into play because that is involved. And then the third is going to be extremely involved or very involved. That's going to be a simulation like the Monte Carlo simulation and sensitivity analysis, and all those things come into play. At a minimum, you can use the quantitative analysis just to actually do some of those simple things. The PERT and EMV techniques will work. The risk score and all those things will work. So how do I move this forward into the next level, which is going to be, how is my solution working? How effective it is, what's not working, and what's emerging, and things like that, right? When you're looking at this, the quantitative approach comes into play, the EMV that we created. So here is an example of something that I have created, A, B, C, D, probability of this is this, the cost impact is that, and the contingency need is that, which is going to be the product of probability and cost impact. So 30% of $40,000 is going to be $12,000. And the number put in parentheses represents an opportunity. So if B materializes, the company will get a cash inflow of $10,000. So as a result of summing up the contingency reserve, I can come up with a total reserve for my project to be $68,000, which is just the sum of all these numbers. Right now, scenario. Risk D has now occurred. How much is left in the contingency reserve? A lot of times people come back and say, D, if that happens, I would require $15,000. So I'll have to subtract 15,000 minus from $68,000, which leaves me with $53,000, right? That's not true, because this is a probability of happening. When I say risk D has now occurred, now this becomes 100%, which means I need the full $30,000 to be tapped. So 68 minus 30 becomes $38,000. Now I have only $38,000 to manage my actual stuff, actual project related risk. If it's $38,000, if any one of those, if risk A happens or risk C happens, my project is going to be under budget. I will not be able to sustain this. Now, this is when you really take into account additional things, right? Risk B now has occurred, which means right now I was under $38,000. If risk B happens, then I will make sure that there is a cash inflow, which means I am adding $10,000 to my budget, which means it's going to be $48,000. So this is how I'm evaluating the EMV, but then I need to actually add some overall project risk, because what if D happening means B is also going to happen faster. It's just a question of time, which means I am not planned for this completely correctly at all, right? So you want to actually start planning for this much in advance, right? As a result of that, you update the risk register with the risk response. So the risk response is going to be, all these things that I mentioned over here. Now you are coming up with a strategy. I want to accept this. I want to transfer this. I want to mitigate this. I want to exploit this particular opportunity. So what are these things that are coming up with? And now you have, things that are associated with, if this happens, what will happen again, and things like that, right? So the risk response plan is going to be having about 10 different strategies. So as I mentioned, it's going to be a positive or a negative risk. A negative risk is a threat, and whenever threat is happening, you want to consciously avoid it. If you cannot avoid it, you want to mitigate it by reducing the probability of its occurrence. If you cannot do any one of those things, then you actually work with somebody who is better equipped to do that, and you transfer the risk over to them, right? If you have done consciously all those things, you accept. And the reverse applies in the positive risk. You talk with your stakeholders, make sure that they are willing to work with you on increasing the opportunity, maximizing it. So under share, instead of transferring, you want to work with people to actually make it happen. Instead of reducing the probability of occurrence, you want to enhance the probability of occurrence. Instead of avoiding it, you want to exploit it. So these are all the different ideas as to how you manage, right? Now, if these things are outside your periphery of control, the project manager or product owner's control, requiring additional decision making from steering committee members or other C-suite members, then you escalate it appropriately. So this is the risk response plan. So you have a structured approach as to how you want to deal with the risk. Right? So use risk information in the governance meeting. So involve stakeholders to help with the go and no-go decision, and appropriate approval on the changes in a timely fashion. Right? The next one is increase your role authority. Maybe your responsibility can be elevated so that your approval rights are more than constantly depending on other people to actually approve. Provide appropriate resources, whether it is technical resources or human resources. You can actually work with them to procure them much in advance by following the change management protocol. Then increase the productivity, evaluate opportunities for potential automation or semi-automation, and experiment some innovative ideas as to how you can do things differently to avoid these problems or enhance the opportunities, right? And remove inefficiency. What are things that are not working? Bandwidth related issues or central dependency on failure on one particular programmer or developer or somebody else. Avoid all these things so that you are able to actually make decision making much better and increase your throughput much better at the end of the project. Right? In summary, risk is all about the perception versus reality, right? And try to bring the stakeholders into the fold by talking to them and understanding their appetite, tolerance, and threshold, and capture that information in the risk register. And that feeds later into the communication plan as to who you want to communicate, how you want to communicate, and the performance reporting and all those things. Draft your own RBS or risk breakdown structure, the category of risks that you want to track in your particular project, and don't yield to this I know it all syndrome. Work with appropriate risk owners. Think RACI here. Who should be the accountable person and who should be the responsible person? Things like that, and then get risk plans approved with appropriate contingencies in place. protect both against the individual risk as well as the overall risk by looking into what is the contingency plan you are having and how you will be able to address them, and turn all assumptions into risks. If you do all these things and then capture them in the risk register appropriately during the identification and subsequent analysis, and then during your response and implementation strategy, then you are using the risk register to much more effectively and efficiently manage your particular project, program, or portfolio. Okay, so I'm wrapping up at this point. So please feel free to ask any questions. If they are course administration related, please reach out to marketing@inflectra.com. If they are related to the content, send an email to the support@inflectra.com. Tag your question with the current webinar title from me, Sriram Rajagopalan, and we will be able to address them at that particular point. So next step, please reach out to support and also to the next webinar in the series. If you haven't registered for that, the benefit register we talked about. At this point, I'm going to turn over to the Q&A and see if there are any questions. Okay, I have two questions. How do teams typically practice effective risk management in a Scrum framework? Does a risk register document discussion fit into one of the established Scrum ceremonies? Obviously. So like I mentioned, the risk adjusted product backlog is the most important product backlog to begin with. So when you are having the backlog grooming sessions, you can have proper transparency. The Scrum framework has this transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So you can actually promote the transparency through the tool of your choice and have people look at this and comment on those risks appropriately much in advance. This helps you in the product owner working with appropriate team members before planning happens to go and clarify all the specific requirements and remove the dependencies, follow the invest property to make sure that the user stories are independent to the large extent they can. So all those things can be done, which means when you come to the planning, you are not at that particular point wondering, well, I can't do this because legal team has to weigh in. This has not been touched by compliance. We are moving into the privacy, so we need to know what those privacy requirements from legal teams are. Or we can't do this primarily because the infrastructure has to be made available. We haven't purchased the tool, or the tool is not completely working. All those ifs and buts can be completely removed much in advance, which means we are able to actually have the appropriately prioritized stories into the backlog and have the team work on them, rather than commit to stories that are not necessarily workable, and velocity goes down and the team does not look good in front of the entire management team. So it is definitely possible to do that, and it is definitely going to be part of your daily Scrum discussion about that, and bring those risks as part of your tagging into the reviews and into the retrospective as well. So everything ties, risk discussion definitely ties. You may not necessarily capture the risk register in this particular format that I mentioned, but these metadata that I'm talking about still applies there. When do you want to enhance the risk? Can you please share an example? So for instance, in one of the projects that I was working on, there was a potential opportunity where we could implement a technical solution that our vendor has had knowledge of. If that particular solution could be used, it is possible that we would be able to have regression testing automatically happening rather than we spending more time on the testing of the repeated functionality that we were repeating. So we basically work with that particular person, and that person said, oh, it's going to be 2 additional people working for almost 3 months to buy that solution, integrate that solution within our organizational framework, make some tweaks and all those things, which means it was a cost. The cost was approximately about $90,000 at that particular point in time. And so the effect, the ROI was once that particular solution was in place, I'm assuming it is a very easily workable solution, because at the end of the day, it's nothing more than automation framework. And if that worked, then Subsequently, all our products will save at least about 2 or 3 days in terms of people spending more time on regression testing functionalities, right? The justification was on the wall, and company came back and said, well, here is $90,000, go ahead and make it happen. So we added that as part of our change management, included that as part of our scope. We brought these 2 additional people, and things worked together very nicely. So that was that. How do teams use continuous discovery to mitigate risk? It's only by dialogue. It's a transparency. At the end of the day, everybody wants risk. So if you see it, you say it. So that's the idea. So that culture has to come in, and people truly identify things much in advance. And if we can track risk management, inspire our team, then how and what's your recommendation? I'm not sure exactly what your question is. Probably I will try to reach out to you separately. There is a Spira. Spira plan has the risk module. Spira team does not have the risk module. In Spira plan, you have a risk module where you can identify risks and associate risks with different elements of your project. That's what I'm trying to talk about, but I will reach out to you separately if you have any thoughts, or email support and ask us. That will be better. And then congratulations, complete lesson. I look forward to the next lesson of Open Input Register. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. I hope I answered all the questions that was asked of me at this point. If I still haven't answered a specific question, or you come to think about it at this point later the seminar, please email them, and I will be able to actually reach out with any feedback at that particular point if I'm able to work on it. Thanks a lot. Have a good one, and wish you all safe.